I really am thrilled to have Herb Kaighan here. And he's going to continue looking at emotional sobriety in the 12 steps. And today he's going to take another in-depth look at the step 4 principle and emotional sobriety core value. And we're really thrilled to have Herb here. We often talk about the chapter step 4, and people are really sometimes stymied by it. And so I have no doubt that Herb is going to make it all make sense. and it's your chance to do that, Herb. Thank you so much. I'm really, really glad you're here.
What an order. I can't go through with it. My name is Herb, and I am an alcoholic. I'm really pleased to be here. And Dr. Berger and I are sort of the team, not sort of, we are the team that co-facilitates this journey for several months, even a couple of years, I believe, is the schedule, to talk about emotional sobriety connected to the steps, connected to psychological therapeutic realities and Dr. Berger's experience, and spiritual realities, which is my experience, and then to connect it all with practicing these principles in all our affairs. That's the key here. In a way, I'm going to disappoint Susie from one aspect, and that is this is not going to be a deep teaching on step 4, the step in how to do it, as much as it is to talk about the potential outcomes and experiences that will come from it and the underlying principles and values that are embedded in it. You can go to my YouTube playlist, which is a very robust recording, many playlists. You could go to probably one of the weekly workshop playlists and listen to the step 4 specifically if you wanted to know about resentment, a deep dive. I spend at least a month, that is 4 different workshops on resentment. A deep dive into fear, probably 1 or 2 workshops, a deep dive into sex, at least 2 workshops, a deep dive into how to bring the step 4 to a conclusion. So you can see that those workshops are at least an hour long, each of the ones I just indicated. So I just indicated 10 hours worth of teaching, explanation, sharing my experience and my knowledge, as well as having participant questions and answers, which really clarifies an awful lot of the work done. Step 4 was pivotal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go forward in my focus on emotional sobriety. Step 4, the principles, the core values of step 4, underneath step 4, what's driving it? Bill was very clear in his introduction to the step 4 inventory. We're not just looking at behavior. We're not just looking at thoughts. We're not just looking at feelings, although we look at all of that. His specific instructions, and you can take a look for it yourself on page 64. This is about the exact nature underneath of behavior and feelings and thoughts. What's the source and the root of the mischief in our lives, the darkness in our lives? This last couple of years, I've been using the metaphor of light and darkness to try to help people illustrate and understand, well, why are we doing this? Oh, we want to feel better, of course. We want to reduce our suffering, of course. Yeah. Well, maybe not. It's not, of course. Maybe you don't know that. But that's the total point of step 4 is an inventory of what's the source of our suffering, not what our suffering is. We could write chapters on that and have done so in therapy. And it probably helped a little bit, but it didn't My suspicion, if your history is like mine, diminish and or reduce and or eliminate the suffering. And I'm going to say something very bold. I don't believe I've ever said it. I've been doing this work for a long time. Step 4 allowed me to identify the suffering itself. I didn't know that I didn't know. Then it allowed me to identify the source of the suffering. And here's the bold statement. Then it allowed me to find a way to eliminate suffering in my life. Bold statement. I've begun to say this last year, in all humility, I have not suffered for 35 years. Oh, I have had pain, but I have not suffered in 35 years because of doing step 4. Didn't intend on saying that. Thank you, Susie, for setting it up. You pressed my button to kind of give that kind of flavor to what we're going to be talking about today, perhaps even to give people a little more motivation to really pay attention to some of the thoughts that I'm going to express. So I like to have a PowerPoint to support the words that I use. Some of you are visual, some of you are auditory. Different people learn different ways. I try to include everything for everybody to maximize the opportunity to learn. Y'all prayed that set aside prayer. Well, or at least you heard somebody pray it. I'm really hoping you can adopt the attitude. Maybe not the prayer, and maybe you don't even believe in God, and that's just fine. But to adopt the attitude of an open mind and an open heart. Now, if you paid attention to the prayer, it wasn't a prayer for God to give you the strength to set aside anything. If you paid attention, the prayer says, God, you please set it aside. You come with your crowbar and open my mind and open my heart so that I will be brought to new information and a new experience. Einstein's the one that said, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. I mean, it's a brilliant statement. I cannot fix my mind with my mind because my mind is the source of my problems. And any solution my mind comes up with on its own will have the problem built in. Very circular, not a resolution. And step 4 very clearly says, made us searching and fearless. Searching, meaning you're doing some pretty analytical work. Now, of course, I try to meet people where they are. I learned that from Dr. Berger from his therapeutic practice. He's a trained psychologist. He said, meet people where they are, not where they think they are, not where you want them to be, not where they should be. Boy, if we could all incorporate that, I am where I am. This is emotional sobriety. I'm not where I want to be. I'm not where I think I am, perhaps. I'm certainly not where the culture and or other people want me to be, perhaps. So where am I in my journey, in my consciousness? The step 4 uses the term moral, but it's not in contrast to immoral. Pay attention to words. Words have the intention of communicating meaning. And if you don't use words that you're familiar with or know the meaning of, look them up in a dictionary. That was the best advice I got from the first man who took me through the steps. Of course, he unpacked the big book and was sort of the Rosetta Stone for the translation of the big book so that I could understand it. I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated. I read English. I could not read, understand, and apply the big book on my own for those first 5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. But when he sat down with me, gave me a specific assignment for reading and highlighting, and then we got together to go over every page, every paragraph, every sentence, sometimes every word, really analytically looking at what does it say, what does it mean, how does it apply to me, what can I do, what can I do? Clearly, the best question, what can I do? Not why, what does it mean? What can I do to have a new experience? Moral here, look it up in a dictionary, means value. What are my values? Now, I don't know that by going to my head. I don't know that by going to my feelings. I know what my values are when I go to my feet. That sounds kind of funny, but what I mean by that is when I go to my behavior. My, you might hate me for this because it's very confrontational. No, no. If you take this seriously, it will be very confrontational. If you want to know who you are, look at your feet, your behavior. If you want to know what you believe, look at your feet, your behavior. If you want to know what your principles are, look at your feet, look at your behavior. Because your feet, your behavior tells you all of that. Doesn't matter what your head says, doesn't matter what your heart says, doesn't matter what you think, feel, or believe. The behavior. Now, if you're robbing banks, you're a bank robber. So it's an amazing litmus test. And I use it in so many ways to come to the truth because on my own, I can't. I'm culturally conditioned to see a certain way. I'm from my family of origin, from my education, from my reading, from my personality, genetically even. I am predisposed to see reality through the lenses that I've been given. And step 4 gives us a new pair of glasses. Step 4 regrinds our lenses. So I'm able to put them on and go, oh, I didn't know that I didn't know. And that's the total point of the set aside attitude more than it is the set aside prayer. Prayer is about intention. It's not about words. Prayer is about intention, not about words. How many of us say the serenity prayer on a regular basis and don't even remember we said it, let alone understand what we just said in the sense of our heart and our experience and our consciousness? The spirit of the the spirit of the serenity prayer is emotional sobriety. It's the prayer, from my standpoint, of emotional sobriety, the serenity prayer. What can I influence? What can't I influence? I don't control anything. What can I influence? What can't I influence? I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to correct the mistakes. I'm going to learn from the mistakes. And over time, by making mistakes and correcting them, I'm going to gather wisdom. That's the serenity prayer, and that's the heart of emotional sobriety. Step 1 is really clear about the bondage. 2 different aspects. The first half, bondage of addiction. And the second half, the bondage of manageability, unmanageability, the bondage of self. The first half is the part that the steps deal with very effectively, steps 1 through 9. Freedom is the outcome. If you don't hear any other word, and you will hear lots of words, that word might help you elevate why you're doing this work, why you're in a 12-step program, what you can expect as a guarantee. No, guarantee. Page 84. We are placed in a position of neutrality when we finish the 9th step. Check it out. Placed, grace. It's not my knowledge. It's not my effort. It's not my working the steps. It's not my finishing the steps. Somehow, when I finish step 9, I have an effective connection to God, a power other than myself. God as I don't understand God. And I'm delivered from my addiction. But I won't stay there, Bill says. We're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Step 1, no choice in our addiction. Our body is different. Our mind is different. Different. 1 out of 10 people. We are abnormal by definition. Normal people learn from suffering. We do not. We repeat the same behavior expecting different results. Bill didn't have that phrase in the day when he wrote in step 1 and 2 about insanity, but he meant it in the classic sense, not psychiatric and psychological, but the classic sense coming from the original Greek and Latin, sanos, sanity, meaning health. Our mind is not healthy. It doesn't act like normal people. We have an addiction. But our real problem is unmanageability. And he says we're not cured of that. Check it out, page 84 and 85. We have a daily reprieve. Unmanageability, a function, a dysfunction of our will, our free will. The key to our humanity and the key to our sanity and the key to our resurrection and redemption. I'll use those words in not a religious sense, but in the technical sense of what they actually really mean: redemption and resurrection, the emergence of the true self. But we have to have help. And in step 2, Bill says on page 53, make a note of it. Don't be looking at your book, please. It'll be a distraction and you'll miss some things that might be important of what I say. Just make a note, page 53. Bill said, God is or God isn't, what is your choice? We are confronted with the question of faith. A choice about power. God is or God isn't. It's really that simple. It's not a thought. It's not knowledge. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's a choice of my free will. And in step 3, we make another choice. But this time he calls it a decision because it's connected to action. A decision to have a relationship with power. So in the last 3 times I've been here, I almost said months, but it's been longer than that, because Dr. Berger and I do solo for each month, and then we do a combo. So that's a quarterly, you'll get us together. So these are the values and principles as I see it. This is as Herb sees it. There's nothing official here. And I've changed them. Last year, I changed step 10 in terms of its principle and its articulation and action because I had whole new experience and new insights with it. Step 1, to be rigorously honest. That's how we built chapter 5, how it works. Read page 58. 2/3 of the page is all about rigorous honesty. One of the books I read was entitled Radical Honesty. I just love that. It's much more powerful than rigorous honesty. Radical, meaning going to the root of me. And I don't know that I don't know. And I can't know that I don't know until, in fact, I'm given the grace of some light that allows me to see that I don't see. And then the rest is history as the dimmer switch goes up and the lights go on. And I come to really desperately need. 10 years sober when I did the steps to have a step 2 and 3 experience for the very first time. Faith and hope, the principles of step 2. Trust, translating faith and hope into action. That's the difference. Step 2 is a choice with no implications. It's just a definition. God is. That's my choice. I don't have any certitude and I don't have any feeling about it. I've made a choice. Now, the key is, as I mentioned earlier, to move my feet in that direction. And when I move my feet in that direction, I am trusting that what I've made a decision about is true. And I want to have a relationship with this power deep down inside of me. Check it out, page 55. With this attitude, you cannot fail. Think honestly, search diligently, search fearlessly. God is deep down inside of us, and that's the only place you'll find God. I'm paraphrasing page 55, but it's completely confirming Appendix 2 that talks about spiritual experience, spiritual awakening. Read it carefully. Page and a half tells you why we're doing this work. A radical change in our thinking and feeling and our behavior. And it's done to us, not by us. Spiritual experience, mystical mountaintop, phenomenal, limited time, 1 hour, 1 week, 1 month, whatever it is. Spiritual awakening, same result, change in the way we think and feel and behave, but it takes a long time. My complete awakening took 10 years. Awakening at first to the addiction problem, and then progressively as to the nature of the addiction problem, the body, and then the nature of the addiction problem, the mind, and then at 10 years, the nature of the unmanageability problem, which allowed me then to have a new experience with steps 2 and 3. Just my experience. It doesn't mean it's going to be yours taking that long, and I hope it doesn't. But translating that choice and decision God is into a behavior that's in alignment with that decision. That's the word I use. It's not in the big book. Alignment. The total point of the process and emotional sobriety is to be in alignment with reality. You see, reality is just reality. As an author once said, her name will come back to me, reality is reality, but only 100% of the time. It's non-negotiable, it's immutable, it's universal, it doesn't change. Reality just is. And step 4 is about identifying that spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. Bill gives us an image. On page 27, he talks about building a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. Obviously, the foundation is step 1. He doesn't say it this clearly, and the word surrender is not in the big book, but I use it because it captures the reality, at least my understanding and experience. That willingness being the cornerstone, that first stone placed on the foundation that sets the direction of the entire arch. Step 3 being the keystone. That is, it holds the entire arch together. That decision to take action, which is my commitment to do steps 4 through 9. I begin with step 4, inventory, because I want freedom. Don't lose sight of the point. The point is not to become a spiritual person. The point is not to work the steps. The point is not to quote the book. The point is not to have a sponsor. The point is not to go to meetings. Meetings and all of the things I just mentioned will not keep you or get you sober. Oh, heresy, Herb. No, just an interpretation. If you read the big book carefully, Bill says God is the solution. A power other than us is a solution. A power other than human power is our solution. Everything else is the finger that points the way. Do not worship the finger. Move toward the light. That's the point. Freedom. And he gives us step 4, which is just, I mean, it's better than any therapy I ever had. Now, I'm not putting down therapy. It was very helpful before and after and during this whole step process. But when I finally understood step 4, I was able to see that I had resentments. I was able to see that I had fears. I was crippled by my sexual behavior, and I did not know that. And I was organically and genetically predisposed to be dishonest. I believe that's my personality wiring. Different people have different wirings. Some are wired to be fearful, some are wired to be resentful, some are wired to be dishonest. And I think the dishonest wiring is the part that drives me in terms of my camouflage and my hiding and my secrets and my guilt and my shame. These are just my observations about my experience. I take a look at the biology that I learned, fight, flight, and freeze, our survival instinct at the base of all human behavior. We want to survive, so we will fight to survive, or we will run if we can't fight, or we will hide, freeze, camouflage, if in fact we can't fight or run. Well, Bill may or may not have had this paradigm, this model, as he was identifying the components of step 4, but he knew about anger, he knew about fear, and he knew about dishonesty in the form of his sexual behavior, his own. And so those are the components that he put into step 4. Resentment. Well, take a look at the dictionary. It comes from the Latin sentire, to feel. But what are we feeling? We're feeling anger again and again and again. I do workshops, as many of you know, and there are people who are 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 and 80 years old, and they're still blaming their parents for their life. Now, I can relate to it because I was 48 when I did this work that I'm describing. That's again described in much more detail in my YouTube recordings. But up to age 48, my dad was a serious person of interest in my life in terms of all the therapy I ever did. And it's true, I was emotionally abused. But here I am, 48 years old. It's about time I grew up. I found out, not as a criticism, but as an invitation. I didn't know that I had fears, fear of discovery, because I had been so dishonest. And I overcompensated because that's the nature of my coping strategy. Words from Dr. Berger, unhealthy coping strategies. So if I felt low self-esteem, then I acted grandiose, but I didn't know the cause and I didn't even know the reality of grandiosity. I really just believed the lie. And that was the most embarrassing thing when I did the unpacking, the analytical work that comes with doing step 4. At first, I did an autobiography and it was good enough. I don't mean to overly complicate it with psychological terminology, but quite frankly, psychological terminology, information, and experience helped me to unpack it in a way where I can be now a decent and healthy human being who can adopt principles that are based on balance and emotional sobriety. Because I now know, as Bill did, Bill had the insight. Check it out, pages 60 to 62, especially that first paragraph on page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. That's why I set up the diagram this way. The root is my self-centeredness. Everything flows from that because that's how I'm wired in my first brain and second brain, the brain stem and the limbic system. I'm wired at the instinct level and at the emotional level, and my cortex takes all that information, that third brain, and creates all the mischief in my life. All the mischief, and I'm being kind with that word, it's a catch-all. Doesn't need a lot of explanation to most of us. The exact nature of our difficulties, the exact nature of our suffering. And I came to understand that I'm 100% responsible for who I am today. 100% responsible for my thoughts, 100% responsible for my feelings. And here's again, confrontation. You will hate me for this if you haven't heard it before. You're 100% responsible for your behavior. And in fact, putting it on steroids, you're 100% responsible for the life that you have today. You have scripted and sculptured the life you have today by your reaction to circumstances and people over time. The Buddhists call it karma. The accumulated impact of all the actions I've taken have given me exactly the life that I have today. Whoa, that's a lot to digest if you've not heard it before. It's a lot to digest if you've heard it before. So, what's the principle? At least for today, it's courage. You've probably seen the French word cour, meaning heart. In the Wizard of Oz, you know about the Tin Man and the lion and the straw man. And they were all looking for things that they already had, but they just didn't know that they had courage. Not on my own power. This man who took me through the steps the first time said, pray a prayer. God help me. That's it. Every time you sit down to do the work, God help me. Write it at the top of your paper. God help me. No matter what you believe or that you believe, write it anyway. I thought I believed. I really did. I mean, my background would give you the expectation that I believed. I had a very rigorous background in religion and spirituality. And I believed that I believed, but I didn't know again that I didn't know that I really didn't believe until I looked at my feet and I saw how I behaved 10 years of sobriety with the new set aside prayer. And I came as a result of good direction in steps 2 and 3 to be delivered to a place of making the choice in step 2 and making the decision in step 3. And for the very first time, making a intentional decision to have a relationship and work for something specific in terms of a personal relationship with a power other than myself. But I was only able to do that with the help of a man who helped me navigate the 4th step back in the first time I did the steps out of the big book. And then with a man who gave me the set aside attitude and prayer and helped me navigate steps 2 and 3. I didn't do the steps in order in the sense of my experience. I did the steps in order in terms of my chronology, but not in terms of my experience. I got underneath resentments to see, in fact, that I had very low self-esteem, which I was compensating for, meaning unintentionally making decisions and having feelings that were coming out in my behavior that I didn't control and that created the mischief in my life. Fear. And I didn't think I had any fear at all until I started making a list and seeing underneath the fear of discovery. That in fact, my go-to position was one of hiding. And my sexual behavior allowed me to see that I didn't have principles that decent people would have. And even if I had the principle, I ignored it. The question number 9 changed my behavior in 1988. I was 5 years sober. Again, creating mischief in my life, not knowing that I didn't know and not realizing that, in fact, I was harming other people and that I was not acting out of integrity. None of that was conscious, but I'm responsible for it nevertheless. Question number 9, what should I have done instead? not as a brickbat to beat me over with guilt or shame, but as a challenge. These are the motives, Herb. These are the criteria. I use the two words for principle, guideline and guardrails. What's the value? Oh, fidelity at the least was one of my values. Well, I never honored it, but I saw that that's the way I was conditioned or wired. It doesn't make any difference, nature or nurture. That was deep inside of me. And yet I didn't behave that way. Being sensitive and considerate of the other person never occurred to me because I was so armored by defending that weak ego that I had that I didn't know that I had. And then all the secrets that come from all of that hiding. And the man made it very clear to me, as we've heard in the meetings many times, you're as sick as your secrets. But he went out at 15 years of sobriety. He kept a secret in his first year. He felt it was nobody's business. He was going to go to his grave with it. And at 15 years of really good sobriety by anybody's standards, he drank again. A story for a different day. But the point is, he kept a shadow, a small cancer that metastasized over time, and it became sufficient darkness to extinguish the light of recovery, or 15 years. And he was out for 5, did this kind of work, and came back. And at 8 years of sobriety, his new sobriety was taking me through the steps to share his experience with me. Fortunately, his life, his background, his experience of drinking and mischief was pretty parallel to mine. So he was able to really help me navigate it for myself. To see the and I'll say the word because it's worth knowing if you don't know the word, and that is narcissism. Look it up. If you have a DSM, look it up there. There are 9 characteristics. The therapist I was in at the time printed it out for me once I was doing this work and was able to identify it myself. He was reluctant to give me those terminology before I was ready to receive it. But because of the step 4 work, I was able to receive it and see with horror that the only thing missing from that 9-point description was my picture. And it's irreversible, it's irremediable. You can't fix it by therapy and or by medication, according to the professionals. And yet, the professionals who I'm in touch with, who evaluated me at the time on a scale of 1 to 10 at an 8, and they put the 10s in prison. Later on, after doing all this work for a couple decades, actually, reevaluated and said, I'm probably at a 2 or 3. Never get over it. You never heal from it, but you get better. I get better as a result of this work. Am I willing to go to any length? What does that even mean? Check it out, page 58. It says, if you want what we have, it's how it works. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length, I'm quoting now, page 58 dash, then you are ready to take certain steps. Well, it's the prelude to step 3, starting with step 4. I lose more people in my workshops in step 4 than any other time. Over half of the group goes away. It's a lot of work, number 1. It's a lot of truth, number 2. There's lots of reasons why people don't stay with the workshop. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just observing. I lose half the people in step 4. If people finish step 4 and 5, they normally finish step 9. If people finish step 4 and 5, if they have good direction, effective direction, people who know what they're doing in the big book and have in fact themselves completed step 9, That's what we want to do. Are you willing to do steps 4 through 9 and finish step 9? Did he say finish step 9? Oh, I've heard in meetings you can never finish step 9. Well, you heard misinformation because it's not my experience. I've finished step 9 each time I've done the work 4 times over a 20-year period with 4 different step mechanics. Finish step 9 because I had a clear and specific step 8, and I got guidance and held myself accountable to that guide for the finishing of step 9. Dead people, people I can't find, people I shouldn't find, everybody who, in fact, I thought that I had harmed, and or they told me I harmed them, even if I didn't think so. I was able to make amends to one way or the other, sometimes very creatively and with spiritual solutions. Again, story for a different day. How free do you want to be? I told you at the beginning of my comments, freedom is the goal. Freedom from addiction. Do you know that's the minimum promise? Page 84, yes, page 84, placed in a position of neutrality, but that's the minimum promise. You want a life that flourishes? You want a life of joy? You want a life free of suffering? Freedom from unmanageability. I manage my life today. I have managed my life since 1988, 89. Not me in solo herb, but me in partnership with power. God's my managing partner. I sit in the morning in guidance and I attempt to follow that guidance on a daily basis. How soon do you want to be free? What does it look like to be free? To be at ease. This is the turning that's committed to in step 3. Turning from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Freedom from addiction, manageability of my life. That's the freedom that is promised. The maximum freedom is I get to manage my life with my free will. As long as I'm rigorously honest, I rebuild my sense of self-worth because I've diminished in partnership with power. I've diminished the darkness. I've eliminated the darkness in many cases, certainly diminishing it because I'm willing. I'm willing to listen to people who have what I want, who have experience, who have knowledge, and who have specific directions for my behavior. I'm using my will. In both cases, Bill says the unhealthy use of my free will is my willfulness, acts contrary to nature, acts contrary to reality. That's why I use the word alignment for emotional sobriety, for step 3, for the promise of completion of steps 4 through 9. I am now in alignment with reality, and step 10 allows me to stay in alignment when I'm disturbed. Read it again, step 10, in that material on pages 84 and 85. But most especially read step 10 in the 12 and 12, because it does clarify the proper use of step 10. Again, there's a lot of misinformation about step 10. I think it's the tool of emotional sobriety. Course correction is what I call it. When I'm disturbed, it says in step 10 in the 12 and 12, when I'm disturbed, it's a spiritual axiom. When I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. And now I know the truth of that because of step 4. Any problem I have is because it's me. I've made a choice to be contrary to operating principles. Again, very much in your face, a phrase that was given to me out of one of the readings I had, Eric Fromm, a psychiatrist from the 1960s. Equivalently, he said, a relapse is not the drink. A relapse is the evidence of a drink. The relapse began with the first compromise of principle. Take that one into your meditation and chew on it for a while. Relapse begins with the first compromise of principle. That's rigorous honesty. You see, we're building an arch through which we walk to a new freedom. The total point is freedom. Next month or months, we'll be talking about step 5, that full disclosure of what we did in step 4. The full disclosure. This is the sine qua non of experiencing and holding on to freedom. We can experience it, Bill says, by the end of the 9th step, but we can't hold it unless on a daily basis we use 10, 11, and 12. Of course, it's optional, but so is suffering. Pain is not optional. Life is difficult, but suffering is optional. And that's how you deal with pain. You want freedom? Realize there's no ceiling, there's no walls, there's no floor to the jail. It's just pathetic Herbie holding on to the bars. And steps 4 through 9 allow us to drop the bars. I have a cartoon that I'll put up next time that is a new development of the freedom for pathetic Herbie, where he exactly can drop the bars because he realizes he's holding the bars in front of his face and nothing else is. I'm 100% responsible for my life today. Embrace joy and avoid suffering. Thank you, Mr. Harvard. And that's it.